I think the race to the top is part of a broader agenda that the president has and the Department of Education have. They have a blueprint. We're coming up to the reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. Race to the top is one part of that. I think we have a confluence of this incentive to change laws, to change policies at the state level that some states have resisted. But 40 states have applied for it, and they're willing to make the types of changes for the resources that they're getting, and they're willing to be transparent and be accountable. And I think that's one part of the reform, and I'm pretty optimistic about that. Not only race to the top, but about what is being proposed by the Department of Education on the reauthorization, including increasing the number of charter schools significantly. Not all charter schools are successful. But the charter movement definitely for communities and students like Latino students has to be expanded to provide the types of opportunities that they can't get in the regular public school. But on the other hand, the vast majority of Latino students are in public schools. So the solution to the problem has to be a solution in the public school system, state by state. The federal contribution to education is very, very small. It comes mostly
as
from
a
states.
portion of the entire
right,
spending.
Yeah. The other point I wanted to make when you mentioned before that in 40 years these are the students who are going to carry the economy and make sure that we are the country that we are today, is that there's never been the political will or the community will to address this problem, this dropout rate of Latinos. Middle-class families and upper middle class families have alternatives. Their public schools are great public schools. So their children are not going to drop out of school. They don't see necessarily or are aware of the implication down the road of having 20 to 30% of your population that doesn't have an education.
How does race to the top look to you, Lindsey?
Well, the first point, I just might have to disagree just a little, that the solution isn't more public funding or to work within the public school frame, but to allow these children to escape some of the really poor and underperforming public schools.
But charters do that, right?
Charters absolutely do that, right? So the Race to the Top program, the administration does deserve a lot of credit for having states lift caps on charter schools. We've seen quite a few states move in that direction as a result of Race to the Top, which has been fantastic. We also would like to give the administration credit for tenure reform, for a few other reforms that are in Race to the Top, and for potentially implementing professional development pay or merit pay for educators. What is yet to be seen is whether or not the merit pay that is proposed by the administration will actually be true rewards for having students increase academically their achievement levels, or will it just be additional money for teachers that take a few professional development classes, which we know have no impact on academic achievement. The real issue with Race to the Top, however, we do need to keep in mind to kind of put the funding in perspective. It is $4 billion, that's a lot of money. Traditionally, a Secretary of Education gets a few $100 million as a discretionary fund. So this is $4 billion. This is substantially more than secretaries normally have to work with. But it's small when you consider it within the totality of what the Department of Ed received as part of the stimulus, which was $100 billion. And that is just an incredible amount of money. That effectively doubled the Department of Ed's budget from 2008 until 2009. So again, there is, within the stimulus at least, that kind of perpetuation of the status quo, which is to throw more money into the public school system. The most, I would argue, perhaps nefarious part of Race to the Top is this, if we peel back the layers a little beyond those reforms that we've seen, this move toward national education standards and testing, which is of great concern to us. This is a one-size-fits-all approach that will not meet the very unique needs of students across the country.
If you look at the sort of league tables of countries in national achievement in standardized testing, all the countries that are ahead of us on that list have national educational standards.
But
Why
so
are they
do all
so
the countries-
nefarious for the United
So
States?
do all the countries that fall below us on the list.
Right.
They also have national standards. So
Right.
I would argue that it's not perhaps their national standards.
No, but if they were so nefarious, then these places wouldn't all be ahead of us. There's got to be a lot of other variables at work.
But so are all of the countries that are below us. They
Mm-hmm.
also have national standards. So I don't think you can attribute their success to standards. What I can think you can look at, though, are states like Massachusetts that have very strong state standards and accountability. Massachusetts, not only does it rank first nationally, but they rank about fifth internationally when you compare them with other countries, which is great. You see Scandinavian countries, you see those 5 on the list, and then you see Massachusetts, which is really incredible. So instead of telling Massachusetts, sorry, if you want to receive federal money, you're going to have to essentially dumb down your standards, we should move toward a system that helps states break away from that federal red tape that you mentioned earlier and actually reform their standards. In Florida, they're so successful because they set a high mark for standards, and then when students reach that high mark, they raise the standard again.
But there's been so much emphasis in the past decade on trying to first getting data by testing every kid who goes to school, and then by trying to understand what the data tells us. If you're comparing apples to apples to apples, North Dakota to Ohio to South Carolina, and there's one set of standards, don't you get something that is more useful?
But who is it
something
useful
that
to?
you can take action around if you've got national standards. And again, I'm not an expert in this area, but it seems that if you're going to a high testing emphasis regime, that common standards would be helpful, because then you'd get numbers that you can use.
But will they be high? That's the first question.
Will they be
And,
high? That's a good question.
Do we know whether they will be resistant from the same political pressures that have dumbed down state standards? I would argue probably not. But on the
Let's get an answer from
one other
Raegen.
quick thing. It will be accountability to Washington, not really horizontally to parents, which is what we really need on the accountability side.
Nobody has to dumb down their standards. If they like their standards and they're tougher than what they think the common standards are, they can complement the common standards. The value of the common standards, Ray, you hit the nail on the head, is that it gives us comparable outcome measures across states. This is really, really important for researchers because the kinds of interventions we're studying, a lot of them are school-based interventions, and you need very big studies because you can't randomize individuals. You have to randomize on schools. You need big studies, and to be able to do those studies across states, if you had comparable outcome measures, is tremendously helpful.
But it's not just policy wonks. It's also a question of fairness, because there are schools in some parts of the country that are considered to be making adequate yearly progress. That's the measure, adequate yearly progress, that have lower standards and lower attainment than schools in other places that are on the hit list because they're not making adequate yearly progress because they have higher standards. Well, that doesn't make any sense, especially if one government is paying for it, the federal government. Ron, you wanted to say?
What I wanted to say is that this movement of creating these national standards that you're mentioning is not coming from the federal government. It's coming from the states. The states realize that they have to have a common core. They have to have a common standards. And only 2 or 3 states have opted out of this agreement. And it's very encouraging to see that we're moving in that direction, at least establish some sort of benchmark that every student in the country has to meet. You can take other states can increase standards above that common core, but at least to have some sort of a baseline that everybody agrees to, that every child in this country has to reach, and make sure that they're accountable for reaching it.
Before the break, and we could probably do a whole hour on this, but I do want to stop just one more time around charter schools, because I'm a client of the local public schools and have been for a really long time. And I've seen charter schools start both in affluent and not so affluent neighborhoods, where basically what they've done is they post good results because they skim the cream. The most aspirational parents, the parents who are most able and most willing to investigate educational options for their children, are the parents who get their kids into these schools. So, it stands to reason that those schools do pretty well, because they don't have to take on all comers in the same way that the local public schools do, especially when it comes to parents who are the least aspirational, least able to work the system, have the lowest level of education themselves. Those kids are more likely to just stay in the districted local school that, because of their address and their age, that they're supposed to go to. I wonder whether those parents and their smart kids wouldn't do better things for their local neighborhood school. I know all about locking kids in bad schools. I don't want to do that, but I also wonder if we're not just creating another tier of schooling for those parents who are most willing to be self-sacrificial, get their kids to other parts of town, and take them out of the neighborhood schools. Creaming.
Right. I don't think that the creaming argument is a little bit easy to overblow because the charter schools have to have lotteries for entrance. Now there's a filter because you have to apply to be in the lottery. And so you do get parents that might be more aware of what the options are. But you often have, in the KIPS report that just came out, the Knowledge is Power program evaluation by Mathematica, indicates that the students entering those schools that start in KIPS schools are below their contemporaries in the regular public schools in surrounding those KIPS schools. So they're not starting off with students that somehow are coming in above the mean.